Hey guys, Misery here, back with another CZM video, and in today's video we're going to be doing the ultimate Hilde guide. Everything you need to know, whether it be epiphanies, partners, decks, everything you need to know about Hilde will be in this video. I've been having an absolute blast and a ton of fun playing Hilde. I think she's like one of my new favorite units in this game. I just like everything about her, down to her aesthetic, her bow, just like her kit with all of her homing arrows and the way they cycle themselves and go draw neutral. It's really valuable and I really like her kit. But before we get into this video, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that I rank every epiphany at a certain tier, with S being highly recommended, A being strong potential, B being awkward to use, kind of like niche, C being outclassed, and F being practically useless. Now this is just my opinion. If you think otherwise and have a different opinion, that is totally fine. You're entitled to your own opinion, just as I am with my own. Now getting straight into the video, what does Hilde do and what role does she play? So Hilde is a ranger of the Instinct Affinity. Now her entire kit revolves around her new stacks called Ionization and Zero In. And basically what Ionization does, it gives plus 8% damage amount taken for each ionization and 4% additional damage amount taken from Hilde for each ionization stack. So that's 12% damage taken from Hilde, or 8% damage taken for any other unit. Now this can be treated basically as morale, so 2 ionization stacks for Hilde would equal like 1 morale since it's 24% and a morale is 20%, so you can basically treat ionization stacks as a source of morale. And with how low Hilde's multipliers are, you ideally want to be stacking morale on her, just like Faye, Diana, Haida Marie, any other units who spam a lot. They want morale and additive buffs, not multiplicative buffs. But also she has another new stack called Zero In, and at the end of the turn 35% extra attack to the enemy with the highest HP for each Zero In. And when this is activated, it'll remove all Zero In stacks with a max of 60, but that goes up to 100 at E6. So basically it's just a huge nuke at the end of the turn for just a huge extra attack. But basically there's 2 ways you can play her. You can play her as a draw support or kind of like a main DPS or sub DPS. Now if you're playing her as a sub DPS, ideally you just want to create homing arrows, and then that's going to create homing arrows in the draw pile. Those will go draw neutral and draw another card, like I said earlier, which is why I really like them. But also if you have a certain big game ranger epiphany that scales off of how many attunement cards you use, these homing arrows do have attunement, so they get activated right when you draw them. It's really nice. They do not cost any AP. They are an unusable card. And then her other cards, draw and release, that's mainly going to be drawing her other cards. Plasma rain, that can apply ionization. It can even go draw neutral on 1 epiphany. And then Vortex Arrow, really good card because draw 3 for 1 AP, and that goes up to draw 4 1 AP at E1, which is really valuable E1. So if you want to go for E1, I highly recommend it. But yeah, basically kind of just wanting to be filling your draw pile with these homing arrows from the Quiver Reload. And then her big game ranger is going to be the upgrade that gives you the Zero In stacks for that big nuke at the end of the turn. Now getting straight into the first epiphany card, here we have Quiver Reload. So this is going to be like her main copy target that you want to copy if you're going in main DPS or sub DPS. Later on we'll talk about the decks and what you want to copy for her draw support deck. But this first Quiver Reload is going to be the best here. Create 4 homing arrow and draw pile, then draw 1 of these cards. So it goes draw neutral because you're creating 4 of those and then it draws 1 of them. You can even chain homing arrows into homing arrows, so you can just draw homing arrows back to back to back. Now the second and third one, these actually change the arrow type. They do not go draw neutral, but I don't think that's too much of a problem because Hilde, she can go draw neutral or even positive. She has a decent amount of draw and can cycle the entire deck pretty easily because her entire deck just draws with these arrows. But the second Quiver Reload is going to be for the Fracture build. That is a new damage over time debuff that recently just got added in season 4. But also the arrow changes from single target to AoE with the Fracture arrow. So if you're going up against a lot of AoE enemies, this Fracture arrow is going to be pretty nice for you. And then for this third one, Homing Arrow Grand, is going to be kind of just like another single target homing arrow, just like the first epiphany. But the difference with the Homing Arrow Grand is that it only creates 1 and not 4 like the first. But the Homing Arrow Grand, it does a ton of nuke damage. It has like a 600% multiplier, so if you're going up against like a single target boss, this Homing Arrow Grand epiphany potentially could be decent. But the main problem is that it only creates 1 arrow and not 4. So if you're running like a big game ranger that gives Zero In, scaling off of how many attunement cards you use, then you're really not going to be getting a lot of those Zero In stacks. Also, another bad thing about this Homing Arrow Grand epiphany is that it's 600% multiplier. The multipliers on the first epiphany for the 4 homing arrow is 144% per arrow, so that equals up to around 600%, but also it goes draw neutral. And like I said, if you have the attunement big game ranger upgrade, you're going to be getting those Zero In stacks a lot more frequently than if you were to run the Quiver Reload with the Homing Arrow Grand epiphany. But the Homing Arrow Grand epiphany is solid in sortie, but it's not really like the best outside of that. And then this fourth Quiver Reload, the worst one here, this one really isn't that good. Unique lead, create 2 homing arrow and draw pile when an enemy is defeated. It'll create 2 homing arrow and draw pile 5 times per turn. So this does have a high ceiling, but this is really only good in like niche scenarios. Could be decent if there are respawn enemies, like maybe if you're going up against waves, kind of just like a niche scenario, and we don't really have much AoE content in the game, especially content that's even hard enough for us to even min-max. Like we don't really have that. So this fourth Quiver Reload is kind of just like whatever. Now onto the fifth Quiver Reload. I actually really like this one. It's unique opener. If you have Tenebria, you remember on her music start card, it also has opener, so this is the first card that ever gets played in the battle. So if you have this on a divine at the start of the turn, when this card is the first card used, draw 2. That's really good for this specific Quiver Reload because this will always be used first. And at the start of the turn, you'll create 3 homing arrow and draw pile. This counts for turn 1. I did test it myself because I got it on a deck. Then homing arrow cannot be a target of turn draw. Basically what that means, at the start of each turn you'll have a natural draw 5, which homing arrow cannot be targeted with that natural draw 5. But yeah, for shorter turn content, this 5th Quiver Reload, you can go a split of, this 5th one and then the 1st one. But if you want to go longer turn content, then it's probably just best to go 4 of the 1st Epiphany, because the main difference with this 5th one, you're getting 1 less homing arrow. Now this upgrade is passive, so you don't need to spend AP every turn to play it, but it's 1 less arrow. It also doesn't go draw neutral besides turn 1 if you have that specific Divine Epiphany I mentioned. I'm moving on to our next card called Plasma Rain. Now this first one, it isn't bad, but it's not the best here. It's pretty solid, it's decent. I would rate it A tier. AoE, it has lead, so it has a chance to get 0 cost, but it also procs 2 ionization to all enemies and then another 2 to a random enemy. Now this second Plasma Rain is going to be the best here because it's 3 ionization to all enemies, has lead like the first one, so has a chance to get 0 cost, but it also has draw 1, which is the main factor of why it's so important here, because it goes draw neutral. Now there is a specific neutral epiphany that has draw 1 that's better than most of these actual unique epiphanies for Plasma Rain specifically, so if you possibly can get that, then that's not a bad option also. But this second Plasma Rain, I would rank it above everything here. It's S tier. As for the third Plasma Rain, this one's going to be C tier. It's really not that good. It's AoE, it's 3 ionization to all enemies, but the main factor of it not being that good is it has defeat, so you need to kill something in order for this to even proc. It also doesn't go draw neutral like the second one. And cards that have the defeat effect are a lot harder to proc, because a lot of enemies in this game have high health pools and you're not going to be killing stuff every turn, so that's why I have that one at C tier. As for the 4th and 5th one, these are both B tier. They're kind of just like niche. Plasma Rain 3 cost, ignition, so you need to exhaust cards while this is in hand to get it down to 0 cost. But it also has piercing damage, which that ignores shield, so if you're going up against shielded enemies, this will ignore the shield and actually go for the base health. And then 3 ionization to all enemies, just like most of the others. As for this 5th one, damage to all enemies, draw 1 attack cards of this unit, streak decrease cost by 1. This one's pretty solid, but it's definitely nothing compared to like the second one. That's really good. The main thing that this one is lacking is no ionization, so you're not getting no ionization from this 5th Plasma Rain. Yes, it'll draw 1 attack cards of this unit, but draw really isn't a problem with Hilde, and decreasing cost by 1 saves you 1 AP. It's kind of just like whatever, you can just bring an AP gen if you really need AP. But yeah, those are the epiphanies ranked for Plasma Rain and what I think on them. Moving on to our next card called Draw and Release. So this first one, I rate this one at A tier. This one's pretty solid, but the main problem is it draws 2 attack cards of this unit. So if you're in a situation where you draw this card like really late into your deck and you don't have like any attack cards to draw, it basically does nothing. So you really need to be drawing this early into your cycle to even get the benefit of this card. But it is a solid card if you can draw early on, because it'll draw 2 arrows or maybe even your Vortex Arrow, and then it gives 4 morale to those cards for 1 turn until used. Like I said earlier, Hilde is a spammy type of unit. She wants morale. Her multipliers are low, they're not the highest. She doesn't want multiplicative buffs, so as many additive buffs or morale as she possibly can get is going to be good on her. As for the second Draw and Release, is going to be one of the best here. Has lead, has a chance to go down to 0 cost. It's a draw 2, and for the next 3 extra attacks of this unit, 1 fracture all enemies. So basically you can treat this kind of as like a repose from Veronica if you get a reduced cost divine on this. But this is probably going to be the card you're going to be copying specifically for support Hilde, because her draw is pretty decent, not that bad if you have this on a reduced cost divine. And then you'll also be getting fracture to the enemies. But if you're going for a Hilde fracture build, then this is also pretty nice too for that deck. Now this third Draw and Release is kind of like a must-have if you specifically want to play Hilde with Fae, because Exorcist Formation gives descent on draw. When you reset in your hand with this third Draw and Release, it'll draw another 5 cards, and then the 5 you already have in your hand that it reset, it'll go back to the draw pile. So you get 10 descent if you use this third Draw and Release with Fae. But outside that niche situation, I would just rate this at B. It's kind of just like whatever. This 4th one is also going to be S tier, just like the second one. This one's going to be really good because draw 2 lead cards, decrease cost of those cards by 1 for 1 turn. So not only are you targeting lead cards, and Hilde has a bunch of lead cards, practically like 80% of her cards are lead. So you'll be drawing 2 Hilde cards, but it'll also be decreasing the cost of those, so it saves you 2 AP. Pretty good value, and I highly recommend it. As for this 5th Draw and Release, I would just rate this at B tier. It's kind of just like niche. It's whatever. Increase damage amount of the next attack card of this unit by 30%, multiplicative for each card drawn through an ability this turn, max 300%. So I've been getting some questions on how to tell if a buff is multiplicative or additive. So there is no plus sign in front of this 30% or 300%, which means it's multiplicative. If it was additive, it would just have the plus, just like this first Epiphany, it has plus 80%, that's 80% additive, whereas this third one is 30 or 300% multiplicative. But, like I was saying earlier, Hilde really wants additive buffs, not multiplicative buffs, so yeah, it's kind of just like whatever. The only real use case I would see for this 5th Draw and Release is maybe like a Grand Arrow build, since the multipliers on that Grand Arrow is pretty high, it's like 600%, so yeah, 300% multiplicative, 600%, that goes up to 1800%. But it's only for one of the Grand Arrows, not all of them, so it's kind of just like whatever. Then moving on to our last Epiphany card, we have Big Game Ranger. This is going to be your upgrade card and how you get 0 in stacks. So these first 2 I would rate at A tier, on hit 3-0 in. That's going to be pretty decent because Hilde does a ton of hits. It's not really hard to do a ton of hits with Hilde. That's going to be stacking up those 0 in stacks, and you have a max stack of 60, so ideally you want to be getting 60 0 in stacks every turn if you possibly can. can. Now the second one, it's unique initiation, so you'll always be starting with it. You won't be starting with any of the others because they don't have initiation, but this one has draw 2 and on hit 2 0 in. So it's 1 less 0 and then the first one, but it's a draw 2 for the first turn and you start with it. So the second one is better for shorter term content, maybe like 1 turn kill stuff. Then moving on to the third big game ranger, this one's pretty good. I have this one at S tier because all the arrows have attunement. You're going to be using so many arrows each turn. If you have 4 quiver reloads on the 4 arrow epiphany, it's going to be 16 arrows. And you're going to be getting 4-0 per arrow, which means 64 0 stacks. That's over the cap of 60. So you'll be able to max out those 0 stacks with this third attunement epiphany easily. As for this fourth big game ranger epiphany, this one's also pretty good because it's going to be like for like a DOT build or a fracture build, you're going to get 5-0 per harmful effect that is applied through an ability. In the fracture epiphany for the quiver reload, you get 3 fracture arrows. So that's going to be 15-0 per quiver reload with the fracture epiphany. But if you get 4 of those, it's going to be 60-0 stacks, which is the max. So it synergizes perfectly and pretty nice for the fracture build. As for this fifth big game ranger epiphany, this one basically F tier. You're not really going to be wanting this at the start of the turn. 30-0 unable to use attack cards of this unit. So that basically means you won't be able to use any of her arrows, not her vortex arrow, just like none of her attack cards. And you may be wondering, couldn't you just use this big game ranger for a support build? Technically yes, but the problem is her vortex arrow, her unique card that has draw 3 for 1 AP, that's an attack card, and 3 draw for 1 AP is insanely valuable. So like I wouldn't even want to give that up for this big game ranger, which is why I'm rating it at F tier. But yeah, that's her big game ranger card. All of the epiphanies ranked. And then moving on to her next card, Vortex Arrow. So like I was just saying, this is a draw 3 for 1 AP, very valuable, and tons of value here. 144% damage to all enemies, so it's AoE, and then plus 60% damage amount for each attack card drawn through an ability this turn. Max 8 cards. That's 480% additive that gets added to the base 144%. So it goes up to over 600% multiplier with a draw 3. So that's a ton of damage on top of the draw. This card is very valuable. So yeah, now you know why I ranked that big game ranger at F tier, because you do not want to be getting rid of this card. But yeah, pretty straightforward, not really much else for me to say about this card. It's just big damage and pretty good draw. Then moving on to her ego skill called Matrix Overlay. So plus 15% weakness damage amount taken to all enemies for 1 turn, draw 3 attack cards of this unit, and then apply weakness attack to those cards for 1 turn. So this is just going to apply a debuff to the enemies that make them take a lot more weakness damage, and then it's going to draw 3 attack cards of Hilde. You most likely won't be using this ego skill for the draw 3 attack cards because I think it's pretty easy to cycle your entire 3 decks with Hilde and other draw supports, but the enemies are going to be taking more damage from Hilde with this ego skill. Kind of self-explanatory like her Vortex Arrow card, not really much for me to say here. It is 4 costs. You look at the top left, 4 light blue bars, that means it's 4 ego points, so it's not too expensive and it's pretty decent value for how many ego points you need to use for it. And moving on to the partners that I recommend for Hilde. So starting off, of course, we have her designated partner, Uni. Uni's going to be her best in slot and better than anyone else. So basically what Uni does, increase attack of the sign combat by 16%, and when an instinct attribute attack card is created in the draw pile by the sign combat, it'll increase the damage amount of extra attack of that card by 40% until used. And then if that card is an unusable card, you'll gain 1 preparing live rounds, which is a new buff that gives 10% critical chance to the sign combat, which is like really good because crit chance is really valuable in this game, and if you have E6 Hilde, you can easily get up to 100% crit rate on Hilde, which is very valuable for how many attacks she does. But yeah, basically each arrow you create with Quiver Reload in the drop pile is going to be getting buffed if you have Uni. And then for her ego skill, 80% damage times 3 to all enemies, so that's 240% damage to all enemies, and then 1 leaving the rest to you, which is a new debuff that when attacked, apply 1 ammo transfer to the assigned combat. And basically what ammo transfer does, increase damage amount of the assigned combat's next extra attack by 40%. So basically you'll be getting these ammo transfer buff stacks on Hilde when you get attacked, but also you'll be getting these ammo transfer stacks when you defeat an enemy. But yeah, Uni is really good for Hilde and I highly recommend her if you are pulling for her partner. She's going to be better than any of the alternative options by a long shot. Speaking of alternative options, if you do not want to get Uni, you can go something like 4-star Rosaria or 5-star Marin. But 4-star Rosaria is going to be better than Marin, even though Marin is a 5-star. Marin really does need like dupe 2 or 3 before she gets better than Rosaria, because Rosaria is just like so good as a 4-star partner just for any ranger. Like it's been that way since the start of the game, because when the game first came out, a lot of people were asking if Marin was better than Rosaria on Veronica, but Rosaria just cleared Marin unless you had dupes on Marin. Also, it's a lot easier to max dupe Rosaria than Marin, since Marin is a 5-star. So highly recommend Rosaria for Hilde. At this point in the game, everyone should have at least 1 copy of Rosaria. I'm not even gonna mention Daisy because Rosaria clears her too. As for the potential, starting off with this first major node, this is just gonna give 1 morale damage amount to the multi-shot card, 20% damage. It's gonna be your basic attack card that does AoE damage, but you're gonna be removing that from all of her decks, so it really doesn't matter. Her second major node, plus 5% damage amount to Hilde's multi-shot. Once again, that's her basic attack card. If Hilde's extra damage stat is 6% or higher, add an additional plus 5% to the modifier. Just whatever potential like the previous one. But the one that is actually important is this third major node, this unique potential. So plus 7% instinct attribute damage amount, and if Hilde's extra damage stat is 6% or higher, add an additional plus 8% to the modifier. So that's gonna go up to 15% instinct attribute damage, which basically acts as like a 5th slot elemental percentage cup. So anywhere you can get elemental percentage is gonna be good, because that's more damage for the designated unit. But yeah, the first two major nodes, you can just skip those. Highly recommend to get this last one because, you know, it's going to be affecting her whole kit. And then the nodes and potentials leading up to those major ones, critical damage and critical chance. Highly recommend to max both of these out also, since, you know, crit chance and crit damage basically DPSs live off of. It's just going to be a big damage increase. Kind of self-explanatory. As for the decks, starting off with this first deck, we have, you know, this quad Quiver Reload deck. So this first Quiver Reload is the unique opener one, like I was talking about earlier. At the start of each turn, when this card is the first card used, you'll draw 2. This is always going to be the first card used since it has opener. And then the other 3 Quiver Reloads are the Epiphany that creates 4 homing arrow and draw pile, then draw one of those cards with a reduced cost of vine. Now they do have lead, so you don't necessarily need reduced cost of vine, or if you have the draw and release that, you know, draws lead cards, that'll reduce the cost of those. But I kind of just put reduced cost of vine on the Quiver Reloads to make it more consistent. For the Plasma Rain, we have the 3 ionization to all enemies and the draw 1. Like I said, that's the best Plasma Rain since it goes draw neutral, but you're also getting 3 ionization to all enemies, which is practically 1 morale, or, you know, for Hilde specifically, it's almost 2 morale. The draw and release is kind of just like a toss-up. You can go the one that draws 2 regular cards or 2 lead cards, but I went with the specific one that draws 2 attack cards of this unit and then plus 80% damage amount to those cards for 1 turn, because my team composition didn't really need the draw that much, and, you know, I kind of wanted to get some extra damage for Hilde. The Big M Ranger is going to be the attunement one. You know, this is going to be 4-0 per attunement card activated. It's going to be really nice since we have 15 arrows here. That's going to hit the max stack of 60-0 and we kept Vortex Arrow because, like I said earlier, really insanely valuable card. The second deck is practically just like a copy of the first deck, but we changed the Quiver Reload to, you know, the homing arrow fracture. We're going to be applying DOT, so, you know, we went the Big Game Ranger that when a harmful effect is applied through an ability, 5-0 in, but I just like splitting the Epiphanies for that passive upgrade, and, you know, you get draw 2 at the start of the battle. And then we just changed the draw and release to, you know, the regular draw 2 cards, and then for the next 3 extra attacks of this unit, 1 fracture all enemies, since we're going to be applying a lot of fracture. That specific draw and release Epiphany, we should be hitting the 60 stacks of 0 in, since we're going to be getting an extra 3 fracture stacks from that draw and release. And then for the third deck, this is kind of just like draw support Hilde. If you want to go, you know, like support Hilde, it's going to be the same Quiver Reload as the other decks. You know, the opener one, draw 2 at the start of the turn, but instead of copying Quiver Reload, we copy draw and release here with the regular draw 2 cards Epiphany, and then we put reduced cost divine on all of them besides 1, because, you know, we needed a divine on the Quiver Reload, so we couldn't go a divine on that last draw and release. And, you know, the Big Game Ranger, it's just the initiation one with a draw 2 once, practically centering this entire deck on trying to get as much draw as we possibly can. But yeah, those are 3 decks for Hilde. If you want to build any of them, I will be leaving the import codes down below in the description of the pinned comment, so you guys can either copy those codes and import, or, you know, just like copy from the video if you really want to. As for the weapon gear slot, it's going to be kind of similar to, you know, most DPSs. We're going to have Criticism of Discord, Dagger That Tricked the Shadow, or RFS 17 specifically for Hilde. Criticism of Discord, you know, good for any DPS, 18% attack, that's a huge buff. Dagger That Tricked the Shadow, 12% critical damage. We're going to be critting a lot, so, you know, want to try to get crit damage, but ideally I would recommend RFS 17 over Dagger That Tricked the Shadow, because RFS 17, 10% critical chance of attack cards with cost 0. And Hilde's unusable arrows count as 0 cost cards, because ever since release we had Veronica's Ballista that was an unusable card, but that counted as a 0 cost card. So it's the same for Hilde's arrows, which is why RFS 17 works. You know, 10% crit chance over the span of 15 or 16 arrows is going to be a lot more value than just 12% critical damage. But yeah, those are the weapon gear slots that I recommend for you to look out for in your chaos runs. Farming specifically for Swamp, because Swamp is the best for any DPS. As for the armor gear slot, there's not really going to be much options here because, you know, we just have Fairy King's Crown, 6% critical chance off of that, but the other 2 are kind of just like whatever. Fairy King's Crown is the best chest piece we have in game specifically for DPS, so it's miles better than any of the others, and I highly recommend it. But if you can't get Fairy King's Crown, I guess you could go Reinforced Combat Suit, you know, get some fixed shield for free. Otherwise, you can just go Assault Boots at the start of the second turn, 200% fixed shield. But yeah, it's kind of unfortunate we don't really have that many good armors for DPSs. I really was hoping they would have added at least another one for the Season 4 Seasonal Chaos, but, you know, they didn't. And then for the accessory gear slot, we have Verdant Shackles, Verdant Day, and Amorphous Cube. Now, Verdant Shackles is going to give 12% attack and 12% defense, you know, mainly just using it for the attack buff. Verdant Day is going to give 8% attack and 12% defense. You may be wondering, why would you go Verdant Day and not Verdant Night? Mainly because, you know, turns 1, 3, and 5 are more important than 2, 4, and 6. You know, people do OTK stuff for 1 turn kill. People also do the same specifically for tower, you know, tower OTKs. Each floor is 1 turn. So, you know, turn 5, you clear the tower. So yeah, turns 1, 3, and 5 are more important. Then if you can't get either of those, you can just go Amorphous Cube, which is 25% damage amount. That's basically 1 morale. And since you're going to be spamming so many arrows with Hilde, it's going to be decent. But yeah, those are all the accessories in each gear slot talked about. You know, all the gear I recommend when you are farming decks. As for the memory fragments, you're going to be wanting to run the new 4-piece set, Battlefield Evolution, on extra attack, or when an attack card is created in draw pile, or on draw through an attack card, you'll gain 1 Evolving Battlefield, and Evolving Battlefield gives 10% critical damage, max 3 stacks, and when 3 stacks are reached, add an additional plus 5% critical damage. So that's 35% crit damage with this specific 4-piece set, Battlefield Evolution. If you have RFS 17 and Fairy King's Crown on your deck, you're going to be getting upwards of like 75-80%, you know, crit chance. That's not even including her partner or dupes that also give critical chance, so, you know, it's very easy to get 100% critical chance on Hilde, which makes this 35% critical damage a lot more valuable from this 4-piece. And then the 2-piece, you're going to to be wanting to run with this new 4-piece is just Executioner's tool set, you know, the crit damage 2-piece. So between these two sets, you're going to be getting a total of 60% crit damage. So that's going to be a ton of value if you're critting a lot. If you do not want to go the new 4-piece, you can just go, you know, like simple 2-2 Blackwing and Executioner set, you know, attack crit damage sets, 2 pieces. People are probably going to have better subsets and rolls on those since they've been out longer. But yeah, ideally in the end, want to be making your way towards that 4-piece Battlefield Evolution set. As for the subsets and the main stats, subsets, you know, it's just going to be crit chance, crit damage, extra damage, and attack. Extra damage is going to be more valuable and more of a damage increase than crit damage. So, you know, I value extra damage over crit damage. But honestly, it's not too big of a deal or a min-max. You can beat the game with either one. And then for the main stats, a 4th slot is going to be crit chance, 5th slot is either going to be elemental percentage or attack, and then 6th slot is also going to be attack. But yeah, those are the memory fragments that I recommend for Hilde. Now, moving on to her ego manifestations, this E1 is actually pretty good. Like I was talking about earlier, increases the draw of Vortex Arrow, and then it changes the damage amount for each attack card drawn that turn from 60% to plus 90%. So honestly, this is a good stopping port if you specifically want to go support Hilde, because most of her other dupes are specifically just for her DPS build. I mean, there is some support in her E6, but that's pretty far away. So like, if you want to go support Hilde, I recommend stopping at E1 or E6. But yeah, this E1, you know, basically gives you a card that's draw 4 for 1 AP. That's a ton of draw for little AP. As for her E2, at the start of the battle, plus 10% to Hilde's critical chance. At the start of the turn or when an enemy is defeated, you'll gain 1 double tap. Basically what double tap does, when homing arrow is activated, 300% extra attack to the enemy with the lowest health, decrease double tap by 1, max 5 stacks. So basically this E2 just gives 10% critical chance, and you know, you gain access to double tap, which is a huge nuke for extra attacks. 300% extra attack, and it has a max of 5 stacks. So you know, you'll be getting like 1500% extra attack damage from this E2. That's not even counting the fact that it could crit. And then moving on to her E3 is probably like her weakest dupe outside of the E5. The E3 is kind of just like whatever. Change the weakness damage amount, take an effective matrix overlay from plus 15% to plus 25%. So it's really like not really that big of an increase, kind of just like small. But if you are going for her E6, you know, it's just extra damage. And then for her E4, for each hit an ally performs, gain 1 Find the Gap, and then Find the Gap, increase damage amount of Hilde's extra attacks by 5%, max 8 stacks. So that goes up to a 40% damage amount increase for Hilde's extra attacks with this E4. Also, again, nothing too insane, but it's way better than the E3. And then moving on to her E6, this E6 is actually really valuable. So when Find the Gap reaches 8 stacks, that's her E4 stacks, plus 15% additional critical chance to instinct attribute allies, increase the max stack of 0 in to 100. Previously it was 60, so that's a big increase there. And at the start of the turn, gain 15 0 in. For each stack of 0 in, plus 1% critical damage to 0 in. So yeah, that critical damage buff is specifically for her 0 in stacks and not all of her cards or attack cards. But it is still a nice buff because that's 45% critical damage. That's a ton. Yeah, when I read this E6, what I kind of think of is that since Arabella and Olga, they both are going to be instinct units coming later in the season, you know, this plus 15% additional critical chance to instinct attribute allies, this E6 is kind of like tailored for them. So, you know, Hilde is probably going to be like a support at E6 for, you know, Arabella or Olga. But it's just insane because it increases the 0 in stacks from 60 to 100, and you'll gain 15 0 in at the start of each turn now. So you really only need to get 85. But yeah, once you get her E6, she's definitely going to be doing some solid DPS, and you know, she's going to be having supportive capabilities too with her draw. As for the recommended teammates I suggest using with Hilde, we could go coordinated attack, draw support, morale bots, or AP gen. Some AP gens I recommend for Hilde, you know, Typhara, Mika, Adelheid. Specifically, Adelheid is going to be good because she has her book card that gives plus 100% damage taken to the target that basically acts as 5 morale, and since we have a 20 morale cap now, the Adelheid book card is the equivalent to 5 morale without actually needing to be like morale stacks. So you know, it doesn't actually affect the 20 morale stack itself. As for the morale bots, you know, there's a ton in this game. You can go Cassius, Rita, Haru, Beryl, Ray, you know, just like any of those. I don't think you'll specifically be needing a draw support for Hilde, but if you do want one, you can go Veronica just to make things easier and cycle through, you know, all 3 of your decks. And then for coordinated attack, you can just go Hugo or Selena. But I see a lot more people using Hugo than Selena because it looks like Hugo is a lot better than Selena specifically for Hilde. But also Hugo has just been getting a ton of value lately with all of the recently released units, whether it be Hilde, Faye, Haida Marie, Diana, you know, all of those units spam. All of those units want to be paired with either Hugo or Selena. Since they do so many hits, it's going to be a lot of coordinated attacks with Hugo and Selena. But yeah, those are all the teammates I recommend specifically using for Hilde. And yeah, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope this video was informative. If it was, I'd very much appreciate if you could show support to the channel, whether it be like, comment, subscribe. All means a ton to me, and I appreciate every single one of you. Let me know what your guys' thoughts on Hilde is so far. If you're loving her, I absolutely like her kit, her aesthetic, her bow aesthetic, you know, everything about her. I think her kit's really nice. I've been having a ton of fun playing with her and experimenting with her, so yeah. I do want to pull E6, but if I do pull her E6, then I can't pull Arabella E6, and if Hilde is this good as, you know, the first unit of the season, I can't even imagine how good Arabella is going to be next month. Yeah, if you have any video suggestions, let me know down below in the comments. I'll take it into consideration. And yeah, that's going to be the end of this video. Hope you guys take care, peace, and be safe. Until the next one.